welcome to another Meet the Author. So Gary, who do we have today?
Well, Tamara, I'm really happy and delighted that we have Bob Edwards here. Hi, Bob. And Bob's going to talk about his book, Bob's Guide to Operational Learning, How to Think Like a Human and Organizational Performance HOP Coach. So, Bob, thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, your co-author, Andrea Baker, can't make it today. She's tied up in this thing called travel, and I know that she sends her regrets. But let's dive right into your book. And I noticed that it was released in 2020. So I had a chance to reflect on it, see how it's going. But let me ask you, what made you decide to write this book?
Todd Conklin told me I needed to. We have a little consortium of us that work together, Todd and me and Andy and Mark Yessen. And Todd's like, Bob, you need to write a book on this work that you guys are doing with operational learning. Learning teams is a part of it. But so he kicked me in motion, and it took Andy and I. By the way, without Andy, this book would have never happened. So it's a play on words, right? Where it says a little help and then slashed out a lot of help from Andrea Baker. So it was originally a book I was writing, and Andy said, Bob, you want some help? I'm like, Andy, I'll never get this figured out. And so she jumped on board and really just did a fantastic job of pulling this book together. And I wrote a bunch of stories, and then she pulled the narrative all together. So that's kind of how it happened. So Todd gave me a lot of grief about it. He's like, Bob, it's taking too long to write this book. I'm like, Todd, I have 12 kids. Andy had one at the time. Give me a minute. We're working on it, right? But we got it. It was a real labor of love, because what we really wanted to do with the book is just to give some help for people that are on this journey, because it's not as easy as it sounds, right? Changing from sort of the old way of looking at things to this newer view. And so we thought, well, we've been doing this for almost 10 years. Let's just share the stuff that we've seen that might help people a bit. So our whole goal was to just, help people out with it.
Right. Well, I'm pretty sure that those that on the show and on the live stream are familiar with HOP theory, but just in case, Bob, what would you say in today's TLDR? It used to be the elevator speech, but now it's too long, didn't read. So what is HOP?
So it's a derivative from human performance, which has been around a long time, which, kind of came from the nuke industry and, Department of Energy. But we in industry about 2012, 2013 picked up on this, Todd and Tony Machar and some of these guys were talking about this thing called human and organizational performance. And so if you think about it, it's kind of three big bodies of knowledge pulled together. It's a behavioral psychology, not that we're trying to change behavior, but we're trying to understand behavior. And so we can build systems thinking. That's another big part of this, right? Systems thinking and then complexity science. So it is a lot more too, but there's a lot of these. Those are three big bodies, which I know are all like lifetimes of learning. But what we try to do, and I'm just an old engineer that trying to help make some of this stuff practical, trying to pull this stuff together to figure out ways to understand work better, and then also to make work better.
Okay, right. Well, your guidebook is divided into 3 parts and 10 chapters. In part 1, I really enjoyed reading about your own personal transformation. What did you go through changing from Possum Bob, the safety guy, to today's HOP coach?
Well, so actually, I'm not a safety guy. I worked in safety because I worked for General Electric, and they let me do several different jobs. I was there 16 years. I was a maintenance manager, I was a design engineer, but I ended up in safety for I think maybe 5 years. And Gary, I was being as creative as I could with all this sort of traditional stuff, but we just couldn't seem to really we just couldn't make ourselves much better. And so Lisa Brooks, will always love her for introducing me to Todd Conklin. Lisa Brooks was at corporate in GE, and we were at our session E, which is a big annual EH&S review in GE. And Lisa said, she said to me and my plant manager, would you guys like to look at something differently? It's called human and organizational performance. So she told us a bit about it. It wasn't super well developed at that point. I mean, Todd and those guys have been kind of kicking this stuff out there a bit, but we said, yeah, we're interested. And my site was one of the early sites in General Electric to actually give this a go. And as we started to give it a go, I realized, wow, there's a lot of stuff I can do with this. Because I'm an old engineer and an old maintenance manager and an old design guy, I'm like, man, we got to bring all this stuff together because we got to build better stuff too. We're getting better at understanding how work gets done and quit blaming the humans, the workers, so much and move more towards a deeper understanding. So yeah, but it was hard for me at first because I was sort of trained in the old safety cop approach. And they actually had a little thing in my factory when I would walk out in the plant on the radio, they'd say, "Fox in the hen house," right? Meaning, look out, here comes a safety guy. And I actually kind of been known for writing people up and sending people home. And even, I mean, people sometimes, Gary, would say, "Bob, I promise you I wasn't trying to break your rule. I'm sorry, I got to be, firm, fair, and consistent." And then at one time I walked into the tool crib and Janet was back there and she was just cracking up. I'm like, "What's so funny?" She said, "They have a thing that they say whenever you come out here." I'm like, "I know, I got a radio." But I wasn't on their channel. And so somebody couldn't remember the phrase. And so they were like, "A possum in the hen house." And so I became Possum Bob. So that's how that happened, right? But when I met Todd and I got sort of exposed to this new way of thinking, actually one of my colleagues there, one of my fellow managers at that site said, "Bob, you're not going to do well with this," because I was such a policeman about it. But when I saw this, I'm like, "Oh my word, I've been doing this wrong." And it was a transformational thing for me, Gary. And it took me a little bit, but not long before I'm like, "Wow, this is so much healthier. This is such a better way of dealing with stuff rather than trying to punish our way to operational excellence." Actually, I don't think anybody's done that. I don't think anybody's successfully punished the way to operational excellence.
Yeah, that's a good point here. I know that you've been working with Todd on the HOP principles. We know that Todd did write a book about it, but over time you've massaged with Andy and others kind of what the principles are. So maybe just quickly, can you just say, I know these are not set in cement and they are evolving and changing, but what are these principles?
Yeah, so we started with basically the human performance principles, and we used those for a bit. And then the more that Todd and Andy and I talked about this stuff, we're like, okay, things are changing. Like we're realizing different things, and we're learning stuff, and some of these don't exactly align with what we're doing with HOP, and so we began to rewrite them. And there's been different iterations of it. So we try to make them more like a mantra, Gary, to where they're easy to remember, but there's so much depth behind each one of these. And we, in the book, we actually give a little bit of a, deeper dive look at these 5 principles. But the first one is the fact that people make mistakes or people aren't perfect. Sometimes people use error as normal. We use that for a while. And so they're none, like you said, these aren't set in cement. These are fluid and they move with us. But the first one being people make mistakes. And by the way, the system's not perfect. The procedures aren't perfect, and neither are the humans. And so we say, okay, when things happen, our next one is that blame doesn't fix it, right? Blame fixes nothing. And you can say it different ways. Blame is a waste of energy. Blame masks system problems for human problems. We'll call it a human problem when really it was a system problem. And so blame fixes nothing is the second one that really kind of seemed to make sense to us. And then we've got to get past this blame thing, but we need to understand the context. Like, well, how does work really get done? So we say context is everything, or context drives behavior, right? The context of work, meaning everything from the production pressure to the metrics, to the tools we have, to the people we have or don't have, all of that context drives our behavior. So we don't say try to change behavior. We say, like James Reason said many years ago, you cannot change the human condition, but you can change the conditions under which humans work. So let's work on that, which then leads us to the learning and improving, which is all this operational learning stuff. We say it's vital because we believe it's that important. And some of the complexity guys teach us, right? In complex systems, learning is one of your most powerful tools. And we use the Canavan framework, which you're very familiar with, a lot because it helps sort of people understand the difference between ordered systems and complexity. And then our last one is this notion of, leaders' response matters. Everybody's response actually matters, but it starts with leadership. And if we can, Todd says this all the time, you can blame and punish, or you can learn and improve, but you can't do both. They vector in opposite directions. It doesn't mean there aren't times that we have to use HR disciplinary action, but that does not build more accountability. That actually gives us a chance to take care of hiring mistakes, right? Someone we shouldn't have hired. But that's actually a pretty low percentage. Most of the time people come to work, they try to do a good job.
True. Well, learning is a word.
Hi, Gary. I had a question about that. So I'm going to kind of pop in here. So I like what you're saying. Bob, about the learning is a power tool. You know, it's a very powerful tool, and context is everything. I did want you to drill a little bit deeper in the leader's response area. And the reason for this is many times in my experience in the workplace, it's actually that middle management level and supervisor level who is running off and doing the blaming first and starting that whole wheel turning, right? So it may not even be where we are right now, the safety professional. They may be struggling with a different dynamic in the workplace. What's your advice and your recommendations to help with those type of things?
Well, I think even for those that are struggling with the sort of desire or need to, they feel like we've got to punish people for these things that they're messing up. A lot of it's driven from like metrics, like my numbers aren't going the way I want, that I'm trying desperately to make something different happen. Some of it comes from just the way we've trained. I mean, or not trained some of our leadership and how to get a more open dialogue. We talk about, a safe place to talk. I guess the technical term might be psychological safety, but I need to be able to tell you the truth about what really goes on, but I can't tell you the truth if I'm afraid you're going to fire me. I mean, that's just human. That's a part of the human behavior, right? And so if I think I might get either written up or fired or publicly humiliated, like this toolbox talk of shame, right? Then I'm probably not going to tell you what's really going on. So we have to have leadership on board with this. And we have to have them really help us set the stage for an open dialogue. And my plant manager, Scott Osborne, we call him Scott O, he was amazing at this. He would come into, not that he didn't struggle, we all struggle, but he would come into learning teams even and kick them off for me and say, hey, we had that quality escape out there or a safety event or whatever it was. And he'd say, I know nobody meant for that to happen. And I want you all to know on this learning team, we are not looking to punish anybody. We are looking to learn. We need to learn. And he would say this, I don't care how ugly the stories are. He called them the blue line stories, from Black Line, Blue Line. He said, tell me the real stories and help me make it better. So we don't just walk away from it and say, all right, well, I told you. No, we actually want to make it better. And he would set that expectation that he wanted them to be open and honest. And he also wanted them to help him make it better. But leaders who can't get on board with that, well, we can't really do good operational learning because people figure out pretty quickly, if I tell you the truth on how we actually got that work done, somebody's getting written up, well, I'm not talking. So that's part of the reason we say leadership's response matters and matters a lot because we can't really do this without leadership being on board.
All right. Okay. You did mention about the blue line, the black line, and if you look in the in my background, I've got a little diagram there, Bob, and maybe you can talk to me about the diagram and also what do we mean by operational learning?
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. So we actually originally used the I would call it the drift model. It would show a black line, which was the plan. It would show a line that drifted away, which is how work got done. It would show a hazard line creeping up to that line. And when they intersected, you had a bad event. And we used that for a while. But remember, I'm not a consultant. I'm a practitioner and I help create some of this stuff. And so the more I did this work, I'm like, wow, really what I think I'm seeing is a whole lot of people out there managing variability more than anything else. So we moved it, we changed it, right? Remember, none of this stuff, nobody owns this stuff. This is open space. This is open thinking, right? So we just changed it. We said, actually, and we made it blue just because, like people getting work done, it kind of fits that. Black line is the plan, black and white, write it down. Blue line, sort of blue collar, not necessarily a blue collar always, but it's the person that does the work. So we started just making it sort of variability around the plan. Sometimes we overperform the plan, sometimes we underperform, but we still had that red line creeping up on us, Gary. And so this past year, I changed it again because I just keep learning so much from doing this. It's like, wait a minute, those hazardous things that are out there, they're out there most of the time. They're every day they're dealing with that stuff. They're stepping around it, stepping under it, dodging it, right? Outmaneuvering it. And so we just changed it to this model, which is the red line laces through the black line and the blue line. Somebody saw this one time recently and they said, well, Bob, you show the red line going above the black line. Are you saying that we design hazards in? And I said, yes, absolutely. I can show you almost any process out there, any system out there, any tool out there. And there are absolute hazards that have been built in because we can't design everything out of it. We don't even have the capacity to know all the things that can hurt people, right? So we say this, you know this, Gary, because you spend a lot of time talking about complexity. In complex adaptive systems, you can't predict everything, which means you can't prevent everything. So we've got to get better at sort of understanding what is happening, not just what has happened, but what is happening, which is that blue line, right? And the people that do the work, the masters of the blue line, they know that better than anybody else if we can make it safe enough for them to talk to us. Does that help?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, you talk about the frontline workers and they're always adapting and adjusting to the unexpected. Good
100%.
example was a crew goes out there to work, all of a sudden the weather changes. It starts to rain.
Yep.
So how do they adapt? Well, maybe they have to put on protective gear, stuff like that. Maybe they have to put up hazard signs, whatever. But you can see they're following the blue line. That's probably not even in the black line, right? It's all, this is very, and because of the weather is changing, there's your hazard line kind of changing along with it as well.
100%.
Yeah,
and
so
also,
I really like
Gary,
this. We've done it, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and so I've done so much operational learning that I realized the stuff that's out there when a bad day happens is kind of out there all the time. It's just if enough of it sort of underperforms at the same time, right? I think Eric Honlegel calls it the coupling of variability. That's when bad things happen. So the hazards are there, but also just all that variability is happening. And you know, sometimes a bad day happens, you're like, man, that felt like the perfect storm, because it was. There's a bunch of variability that underperformed at the same time and outmaneuvered the human. Tom, you got your hand up. Sorry, I got to watch for that. There's a little thing up in the corner. I missed it. Go ahead.
That's right. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about reconciling the tension between a learning organization and a disciplined organization. And I guess it's sort of flagged up, if you like, it coming from GE, you've got this tension between what you're describing and the world. I guess in production and GE, it would be the Six Sigma, you know, that there's an obsession with reducing variability. And I guess when we're talking about safety, particularly high reliability and major accident hazards, we tend to talk about, you know, follow the procedure, discipline, rigor, et cetera, very, very constrained. And it's kind of reducing the people to a machine versus a learning culture, which is where you want people who are inquisitive and experiment. Those sorts of aspects, because I think there is a tension between sort of creative, intelligent, interested people can feel very constrained by the discipline. And I think leaders who've got a very high EQ kind of sense that difference. So they, you know, I respect your expertise. I encourage you to challenge, experiment. And as you described, when there's an incident, it's very easy. And I think we're quite good at it. You know, we know how to say, yeah, we've had an incident. This is all about learning and not blaming. But in routine operations, encouraging people to experiment when things are going well, which is what you need to do if you're an inquisitive person to avoid becoming bored. So I just wondered whether you could talk a bit about how you manage that tension between learning and experimentation, the kind of the naughty child, the naughty boy in the corner of the room who takes everything apart, versus the person who does what they're supposed to do with the toys and never breaks anything. It's that tension that I think is quite, I think we find very difficult in the safety community.
Yeah.
Encourage genuine
Tom,
learning behaviors.
Yeah, brilliant question. So, you know, we did, a lot of companies did this. We did lean to get rid of waste. We did Sigma to get rid of variability, and we didn't get rid of either one of them, right? We made things better, but in some cases we spent massive amounts of effort to try to get rid of variability that didn't even really help us much in production. Maybe you didn't, but I'm just telling you, my experience, I've lived this stuff for 15 years, right? And so we were realizing that part of complexity is this curiosity that you're talking about. And if leaders can be more curious and less judgmental, I say this all the time, Tom, after something happens, we're all geniuses, right? I mean, afterwards, like we're the smartest people in the room afterwards, but we didn't see this about to happen because we were trying to get work done. So what we got to do, I think, is help our leadership become more curious. If people leave with like nothing else from our little time together here today, if we're just more curious, not just like when bad things happen, but how does work actually get done? And Tom, I've done so much operational learning and learning teams when there's been no event, and I find the same brittleness in the system as when we've had a terrible day. Like the people that actually do the work, they're managing this variability all the time. So with leaders that don't think we have a problem because we haven't had an incident, we suggest, hey, let's study some process that you think is pretty darn good. I did this at a site, Tom, that this particular group, they handle really, really dangerous stuff. And they got Project of the Year award, like a big trophy. And so they wanted to do a learning team to understand just how good they were. And even the manager who sponsored it, he's brilliant. He said, let's title this thing, were we lucky or were we good? And he was open to this. He was curious enough. And we unlocked this amazing story of this project and how much they had to manage variability through that whole project and how they actually were really, really good. But Tom, there were 2 places they identified with 1 layer of defense, and that's it. And that defense dropped out, they wouldn't have got Project of the Year and had a really, really bad day. And so it actually took that manager a moment, because he said, I actually didn't know this. Because why? Well, because he doesn't do the actual work, but his team does. So what we can do with leaders that are struggling with this, I think, and say, hey, if you believe that your processes are all great, let's just pick one and learn. And maybe it will be. And if it is, fantastic. Let me just say, I've done hundreds and I've exposure now to thousands of operational learning teams and this operational learning approach. Yeah, I don't really find things are great. I find that people are amazing and quite adaptive. And they're really, a lot of what we think is great systems are incredible humans adapting in the moment, propping that system up. And we're seeing a real problem now because people like you and I, because we're not as young as we used to be, right? We're moving out of the workspace, and the new generation, as good as they are, they just don't know this stuff. And so now we're seeing brittleness creeping into a lot of industries where we've lost that prop, right? Those highly adaptive people. And we're getting frustrated. We're like, why do these new people know this? Well, they can't know it. They haven't experienced it yet. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the key thing, Tom, is curiosity for leaders. And the moment we think I like what David Payne said. David Payne was a senior VP from Chevron for safety. And he said, don't tell me how good our metrics are. Show me what should be keeping me up at night. He challenged his front lines, his leaders. He said, don't let me sleep good. Make it hard for me to sleep good. Show me the challenges. Show me what should be making me uncomfortable. Show me the brittleness. He said, all green metrics scare me. I don't know any context behind it. I don't know what really is there. So leaders that become more curious, they're not satisfied with all the metrics being in the green. They want to know the context. How are we actually getting there? So I don't know if that helps or not. If we could give everybody the red matrix peel, the reality one from the Matrix movie, then they would see this clearly. But I think the next best thing is to show them what does that complexity really look like.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you're saying, because it can even boil down to like the littlest thing that we may overlook. I remember once doing a job observation with a line cook, and the guy had been doing his job for like 30 years. So like I wasn't there to critique how he was doing his job. So I switched it around. There was like a manual on how to do the fryer. And so we opened it up and it was clean because he had never read it. Right. And so and this individual actually, because of a brain injury, couldn't read words. So I was reading through, and he actually stopped me several times because there was stuff missing in the manual that he just knew to do.
I'm doing it.
And we were like putting in stuff like shut the fryer off and let it cool for a half an hour. Going back to your brittle comment, a brand new employee who has never done this before, that would never have occurred to them. And that could have been a critical incident.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Good example. Yeah, good example.
So Tom, did that help, Tom? What I said, did it help at all?
Yeah, I think, I don't think there's any easy answers here, but I think it's important that we recognize there's the tension, because on the one hand, a procedure is to tell you what to do, but on the other hand, exactly as Tamara's described, a procedure is to capture the learning and experience of people. So it's just recognizing there is that tension.
Yeah,
and you don't want people playing with everything, but you
I haven't seen any perfect
try
procedures. I've not seen anybody that has perfect procedures or even close to perfect. I work with over 130 companies, some of the biggest companies on planet Earth. Nobody has perfect procedures. Matter of fact, there's a ton of stuff missing from every procedure I look at. And if they tried to write it all down, because I've seen that, this doc is 20 something pages and nobody's reading it, right? So procedures to me are important. That what somebody or somebody's wrote down at some point in time that made sense at that point in time, they do not capture variability very well at all. And I'm a lean, I support a lot of the lean thinking too, but standard work doesn't capture variability hardly at all. And
Right.
so I think you're right, Tom. Part of it is just that awareness. So then we can say, okay, the procedure is important, but the procedure is not the end all. It may actually have some stuff that's missing. And Tom, I've got some examples where if someone had followed that procedure correctly, they'd be dead today. They because of their curiosity. Now, I'm not saying that in some cases, people that have veered from procedures have also been injured, but I'm saying in this particular one, the guy's curiosity about why something was siphoning off too fast caused him to go check that out. And then the vessel right there that he was next to, it would have very likely killed him.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, I guess that's it's something which we're uncomfortable with saying. And certainly, I mean, I do a lot of serious accident investigations, and
yep.
it's amazing how common that something really bad has been prevented by a really experienced and inquisitive person saying, this just doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
Correct.
Way outside the procedures. So I think it's sort of recognizing that ability for people to contribute, but how you do that is very difficult in some worlds. You know,
Yeah. Well,
like if saying an airline pilot, oh, okay. I mean, they talk about situational awareness, don't they? In airline pilots, it's just sort of thinking outside the formal procedures, but it's hard to document.
I know, and I know you've seen the movie Sully, right? Sullenberger, where when he lost those two engines, if I'm not mistaken, he jumped way out of procedure and flipped on the auxiliary power unit because he knew he needed some power. It was way down in the procedure from where he was, but because he knew, he jumped out of procedure, which helped. I think it gave him some avionics and stuff to help him out, right? So he knew he needed power because he had lost both engines. So
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that was an example.
yeah.
And I guess it's the tension about how do we teach people to follow the procedure, but do the Sullenberger. You know,
Right. And so part
everyone's
of
got
it,
a
I
little
think,
bit of Sullenberger in them. I guess that's the message. So how do we
right.
encourage that?
And we need that those critical thinking skills. I mean, and I know you probably never said it. I hope I haven't ever said this, but I know I've heard it before, where I've heard this said in organizations, well, we just hired them to work, not to think. And that's such a terrible way to think about work. I want people to think. I want them to challenge. I want them to question. If a procedure doesn't make sense, let's talk about it. But we also know that people that actually get work done, a lot of times they just simply get the work done. And then something bad happens and we come after them, full on, like, well, you should have done this and you could have done that. And instead of asking them, hey, what was it actually like to do this work?
Yeah. Okay. I'd like
Gordon,
to bring us
how
back
you doing
to,
today?
yeah, I'd like to bring us back to focus on the book because there's a lot of stuff on the book. I know that you and Andrea, you included a terrific pocket guide on learning teams with lots of how-to information in there. So we don't have enough time to go through everything in there. But maybe just for this, how about you explain what your learning cycle is that works for you when you have an opportunity?
I will, Gary, but I can't pass up Gordon. I love Gordon. Gordon, what's going on, brother?
Oh, there's Gordon. Okay.
He had his hand up.
Good, Bob. Really good to hear from you. And a great interview, by the way. This is really awesome. It just kind of fortifies some of the stuff we're doing here, Energy Safety Canada here in the West with our group. So I just did a session yesterday with a group oil sands folks, 45 folks in Fort McMurray, Bob, and you're familiar with the area.
Yeah.
And it was good because we were focusing on all these components that feed into kind of the new view HOP, safety 2, the whole 9 yards. But one of the things that I stressed on one of my slides was I just put it in the chat there about flexibility in concert with competency and judgment when you're looking how that adaptive variability that where the frontline worker has to make the decisions based on whether what's happening, all the things that are feeding into their purview there when they're doing their work. And it seemed like it resonated with the people in the room. You have to have flexibility, but you have to restrain that flexibility if you don't have competency, because that's a very dangerous model if you allow people to make decisions beyond what they don't know. So I'll leave it with that. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant because when you have someone that's super experienced and stuff, they can actually do things that maybe very few other people could even do. I mean, pilots are a good example of that, right? And then the challenge, Gordon, right? You know this, right? The challenge is then how do we help people that don't have that competency but still want to prove they're good? Because that's me. I mean, I want to show you I'm good at this. How do we get them to actually pump the brakes and say, well, maybe I'm not quite ready to handle this, and I need some help here. So I think that stop work is one of those things that we talk about, but that we don't actually do very often, because most people don't stop work. They try to get it done. And I say this about stop work, don't get rid of it, but it's more of to me, it's more of a supervisor or a manager tool than it is a worker tool, because most people close to the work, to your point, Gordon, they're going to try to figure it out and get it done if they can. So try to help them. That's why we need supervisors close to the work, right? Because if they're in meetings and on emails and doing reports all day long, they are not there to help pump the brakes when things are going a little bit sideways. So good for you, Gordon. I'm glad you're putting that together for folks to be able to think about this. Gary, you were saying, what's my approach to operational learning?
Yeah, because we were talking about that, about more about operational learning, but when you have a learning team and you put together, because you've done so many of them, you put them through a learning cycle. I thought it'd be very interesting to tell people what is soak time and that sort of stuff. How does that?
Yeah. Okay, good. So our book is about operational learning, which is a very broad sort of topic. And we started out actually in GE, Andrea and I both did, creating this learning team approach because Todd had shared a few thoughts about it, and then we took it and sort of built something out of it that we could use in a practical, everyday way to move us away from the traditional investigations. And so we began in both, she was in aviation, I was in appliances, and we both began to work together through this operational learning piece. And we found some things that really seemed to help. And we learned a lot of stuff along the way from Todd and Tony Bouchard and Eric Hott. I mean, we read and study, and I love the Canavan framework with David Snowden's work. And so, but there's a few things that really sort of seem to make a lot of sense for operational learning, period. Learning teams for sure, but also any kind of operational learning. And the first thing is that we learn first. And we don't come up with a problem statement until we've learned. And that's backwards from a lot of like problem solving methods where they say the first thing you need is a problem statement. We don't think we know a problem statement really until we've taken time to learn. So in a learning team, for example, our first session for me is about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes long, not very long. Bringing people together in a place that's safe for them, right? Their break room, a team room, someplace that's not intimidating, right? And sort of setting that safe place to talk. Having somebody that's a manager kick it off, and then they'll kick themselves out and leave, and then just learn. Take an hour and see how much you can learn. And so as a facilitator for operational learning in any conversation, our job is not to know, our job is to be curious. And so I just really ask them a ton of questions, even if it's event-based. I don't shy away, Gary, from the fact that it was an event. I just say, I know we had an event, whatever it was, and I'm not safety, right? I mean, this is for anything. Quality escape, safety, operational upset, you can use it for anything. Today, let's not even talk about that unless you really feel a need to. I know you already have the system stable enough to operate, but let's back up a minute. Tell me what it takes to run that combi left, or tell me what it takes to operate in team 3 out there, or whatever their world is. And so we just learned for about an hour. Now, what I do, Gary, is I like whiteboards or flip charts. I just write stuff as we go. I don't type it into a computer because it feels like too private. I don't write it on a notepad, because it feels like I'm not being transparent enough. So I just write what they're telling me. Now, if somebody says something like, "Oh, those maintenance guys, those stupid maintenance guys are always late," I don't write that. I'll write something like, "Is a challenge to get maintenance out here," because I may have maintenance in there tomorrow. And so I just learn. I give them some soak time, preferably overnight. And physiologically, your brain just sort of sorts things out. You all know this. You've all woken up the next day after some really important conversation and think, "Man, I forgot to talk about this," or "We should have talked about that." And so we just build soak time in. It's just really, really helpful. It's never failed me. It always helps. And then in our second session, or second conversation, I should say, we start back in learning mode. I do a review. They always teach me more stuff. I wake up with new points of curiosity. And then once we gain, so for me, learning teams are usually 3 or 4 sessions, none of them very long, hour and a half long. And sometimes there's more than that, but usually not, because what our goal is to learn about the work. So I gain an understanding of the work, come up with some problems we think need to be worked on. You can call them problem statements or areas for improvement, and then get ideas from the team. So the team members' ideas, and I've got a lot of experience with this because I do this all the time. They come up with some of the coolest, in many cases, the most cost-effective. So Tom, this goes back to my Lean, Six Sigma, and all that stuff too. If I get the voice of the worker in there and they come up with ideas, a lot of times, if not most of the time, their ideas are more practical than mine and more doable. Like sometimes I come up with these big system changes, but sometimes it just needs an adjustment or a tweak or something that they see. So that's it. We learn, we gain an understanding. Then there's sort of this, what do we want to work on? And then we go out to try to improve some stuff. And we're really big on tri-storming, which is also a lean methodology that a lot of people don't know about it because it's hard to put in a scorecard or a dashboard. But tri-storming is where you take your brainstormed ideas and you go try them out without spending a bunch of money. And lean really taught us how to do that. So once again, HOP, we bring in the good stuff from anywhere we want to, and including things like lean or Six Sigma or reliability engineering or resilience engineering. So it gives us a free space to bring in the best of the best. So that's kind of the cycle, right? And then we want to keep the learning team engaged, and we'll make sure that we actually did something that made it better.
Cool, great. Aaron, you got your hand up.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bob, for just good chat today. I love the conversation. I'm fairly new to Make You Safe and to the safety culture like you. I've spent a lot of time in manufacturing and have recently joined this team and devouring lots of resources, including your book, which was glad to join the conversation today. In my past life, we talked a lot. There was an author, a guy by the name of Steven Spear, who wrote a book about high velocity organizations. Yep, exactly. And he made the concept about, complex things aren't designed or discovered. And you think about just complex manufacturing lines, somebody tries to sit down and design that perfectly. And your comment earlier about designing perfect, safe work environments really resonated with that same kind of concept. But we hate to think about discovery, when it comes to safety. And then another conversation, I believe I heard it from Todd Conklin. I think he tells the story about hurdlers, and their goal is to get over the hurdle just above the line, right? And so we think about black line, blue line, red line, and how do you do safety just enough? And then that makes me really uncomfortable when you think about what is risk, right? Risk is to get us the farthest away from that red line. And so we tend to over-engineer things. And we're back to the tension conversation that we had earlier about how do you do this in this space when you're thinking about as you mentioned the story about the power or knowing that something wasn't right. And so they get out of the way. That comes into just over the line just enough. But with this concept of HOP and really being more thoughtful about what we're doing instead of just procedural, literal and legalistic about it. I don't know, that's a combination of things that I've been struggling with and try to how to balance those pieces. I'd just love to hear your comments in that space. Well,
yeah. So first of all, you're thinking like we're thinking, right? It means it is a balance, and I don't think anybody has a great answer. I just think we're getting better at it. I think we're getting better at sort of learning. I don't think we've changed work much yet. I mean, I haven't seen it. I think that we're getting better at understanding how work gets done, which is important. That's a first step, like the complexity of the work. But I don't think that we've changed work much yet at all in most organizations. Some cases, it's really hard to change because it was systems that have been in place for decades in some cases, right? It's not going to be easy to change it. So I think it's going to be a struggle for a while. And what's going to be hard is that we're going to have leaders and managers who are going to say, hey, well, we've been doing this safety 2 thing or safety differently. And we call it HOP. How come things aren't better? Like they expect a magic pill or some silver bullet. Like, well, we have to change work. We have to change the way, like we don't have a lot of mitigation in most work. You think about a car has a lot of prevention and mitigation, right? Systems to keep you from running into stuff, but then also cars are designed to run into stuff. I mean, they're crumple zones, airbag deployments, survivable space, right? Just being honest, I don't really see a lot of survivable space with a whole lot of the stuff we build at work. We have a whole bunch of stuff we're trying to prevent, right? So if you can just prevent everything, but remember, we can't prevent everything because it's complexity. So I think it's going to be a tug of war. It's going to be a struggle. I don't think anybody has a clear answer. I just think we're getting better at learning, which is encouraging to me because I know this, we did not get better by laying down the law and punishing people. We drove really important conversations underground, and we actually lost some really good people. Aaron, I was at a site where a very seasoned maintenance guy had missed a step in like a 20-page lockout. Because they had zero tolerance, they fired him. That's millions of dollars walking out the door and tons of experience walking, but they had zero tolerance, so they had no choice but to follow through and fire him. So we gotta rethink that stuff. That's not helpful.
Rose has got
I don't know
a
if it helps or not, Aaron. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Rosa, Rosa, and then Tom. Rosa.
Hi, my little orange hand isn't working, so
Well, I didn't want the blood to run out of your hand, right? Tom has a chronic hand. He can hold it up a lot longer. What do you think,
Yeah.
Rosa?
I was just wondering, when you say things haven't changed, why haven't things gotten better? Doesn't that depend on what you're measuring or what you consider getting better? Because it seems to me that one of the things that HOP does is it changes the atmosphere, the psychological safety, the way people are communicating, and to me, it's very hard to measure those things and the benefit that that's producing. So could you talk to that a little bit? Because I think metrics are so, they're holding everybody hostage.
Yeah. And Rosa, we all sort of bought into it, right? What gets measured gets improved. And, if the metrics look good, we must be good. And right. But I don't know. I think that metrics are they can be an obsession. We can sort of fixate on them. I know you probably read the book by Mueller, The Tyranny of Metrics. That book is so powerful. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. And he talks about not that we don't need metrics, but we need to understand what's really going on. And Rosa, to your point, like some people have said to me, so if we do this HOP stuff, will our injury rates go down? I'm like, probably not. They're probably going to go up for a bit. Ours did, because people were started bringing stuff forward that they had been hiding. People were not bringing stuff forward because we used to, I know you probably don't do this, but we used to reward for not getting injured. You would get a payout, financial payout, if you didn't have injuries. A lot of companies have some version of that. And so we began to change even that because we realized we were incentivizing people to not report. So then the numbers went up. I can tell you in about a 2-year period of doing HOP at my site, our injury rates went up, but our severity rates dropped, and our workers' comp was the lowest we had ever seen it, Rosa, because we were actually learning the stuff to work on. But you're brilliant in saying, what are we measuring? And not necessarily it's not bad that number went up. It actually shows that people are bringing stuff forward. So, but you're right in saying that, how do we deal with that? Because if right now my performance payout is that the injury rate has to be 25% less than it was last year, well, now you just ate into my money. As opposed to saying, wait, why are these rates going up? Well, because we're really actually hearing from people. They're bringing stuff forward. They're not going home injured. And we're actually getting a better understanding of what we need to work on. So yeah, I'm not opposed to metrics, but boy, we could talk all day about metrics. And metrics without context, I truly believe are dangerous and in some cases deadly. So I'm all about what is the context behind the metric. I'm like David Payne with Chevron. It's like, it doesn't matter how good they are. I want to know what the real deal is. How do we get there? I saw a site that had the best production day that ever had, and they nearly blew up one of their main units getting there. But that wasn't talked about. It was just the numbers looked great. So yeah, we got to be able to talk about the real deal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just checking the clock here. Like we've spent 45 minutes already. It's amazing how time flies. I just want to briefly mention that, and Aaron, you'll know that you got the book. Part 2 is really a whole section on Bob's and Andrea's practical approach to operational learning. There's over 20 great hints and tips, and I was going to ask Bob to talk about a few, but I'm just going to pass that and suggest that why don't you just buy the book, folks, and then you can read them for yourself. And then I'm sure, Bob, if they email you or kind of contact you, you can go much deeper into that.
Yeah.
I'm interested, though, in your part 3, because it's entitled Opportunities for Operational Learning.
Right.
And I think most of us are aware that there's been some skepticism about the new view of human error, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of published, peer-reviewed empirical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's some truth to that, but I sense it's because practitioners, we're shifting to collecting a different type of data, narrative data. We're telling stories about work has done. And that's really where all the evidence is being compiled, and it's getting turned into improvements here. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so narrative storytelling is brilliant. I think it's the way that, I think we can change a lot of stuff when we tell better stories. When we have examples of how this actually works. I don't know, it's interesting to me. we're seeing this HOP sort of thinking really kind of moving into almost all aspects of workplaces now. We're seeing it in quality. We're seeing it in operational upsets and challenges. We're even seeing it in like management of change, which I'm an old design guy. I love the fact that we're now designing stuff using the HOP approach, which is the voice of those who actually know about human error and know about the mistakes they've made and know about the systems they've had to deal with, helping us design better processes and equipment. So I don't know. I think it's just, we're just kind of breaking into this, where all this can go, but we're seeing more and more organizations. This goes way beyond safety. And I don't mean that to sound bad. I mean, safety is super important, but a lot of times I think safety is an outcome from our sort of operational struggles. So we can get in there and understand those struggles better and get some ideas from the folks on how to make it better. I think we'll help with safety, quality, even productivity.
Yeah, it's cool. I know one thing that you've done, and again, this goes back where you said that you just have a lot of stories, and thank God for Andy to kind of like put them together in a book that makes sense. And in one part, I counted over 11 really mind-blowing stories that you've shared. How about if you give a taste what's in the guide? Do you have a favorite story that you like to tell? I mean, you've got one about who buried Bill, which sounds really cool, or starting small and try storming, telling leaders what you think they want to hear. Well, if you were to pick a favorite, what would you pick?
Yeah, I guess I don't have a favorite because they're all just stories that have happened. I've got hundreds of them now because of all the learning teams. We picked a few that we thought would sort of, matter of fact, it's funny because I told you this book would not have happened without Andrea. And she was like drawing all this together. At one point she said, Bob, you've sent me that story now 3 times. Stop rewriting it. I'm like, oh, sorry. Like I was just literally writing stories. I'm like, hey, I should tell her about this one. And so I wrote, which I said, just pick the one that you like the best. But the story, like a quick example, the one Who Buried Bill is about some road workers and the fact that they were doing some work and they messed up and wasn't shored up good enough. Anyway, it partially buried this guy. He survived. It was not like a fatality, but they were ready to fire somebody. And it was actually a city, like a little city group that brought me in because of somebody that I worked with who was a part of the as I don't know, a commissioner or something, and as well. And he said, man, don't fire those guys. Let's actually try to learn. And so as we started learning about what they were dealing with, it's all about context, right, Gary? So it's a story of the road was washed out. They were behind schedule, and they're people really upset because they couldn't get to into their neighborhood easily, and the weather was bad and the ground was marshy. Anyway, all this stuff, you start looking at this, and they were managing all of that. And it ended up with a bad outcome, but you're looking at it and thinking, wow, these guys don't need to be punished. These guys are actually trying to manage all that variability. And what was interesting about that one is that when I was there talking to that leadership team, I shared another story of where someone had brought up a point in a learning team where we had a fire on a piece of equipment, and they brought up that they'd had 2 fires on their shift, but they'd never told anybody. And I said, thank you for telling me that. Teach me about your fires. And the HR from that city commission, that city group, when I told that story and then dealing with this Who Buried Bill, because I did some leadership training there, she said, wait a minute, are you telling me you didn't punish that guy because he had 2 fires and never told anybody? She said, we have mandated reporting and I have an open door policy. I said, both of those are nice, except there's no such thing as mandated reporting. That's a made up term. Right? All reporting is voluntary. And if we don't have an environment where people will bring stuff forward, and she said, well, I have an open door policy. I said, yeah, but road workers aren't really known for going to HR and saying, can I complain because somebody threw a beer bottle at me as they drove by? Right? They're not known for that. What are they known for doing? Getting work done. I mean, we had a power outage here yesterday, and watch those utility guys right down my road here. The storm had just let up. It was still thundering off in the distance. And those guys it took them 4 hours of bringing power back on. And so when you really look at the work that these guys did, nobody needed to be punished. It doesn't mean we can't make things better. Maybe they need some good shoring equipment or whatever with when they're digging, but punishing them would fix absolutely nothing. So the book has just got a lot of examples of where you can see how we could have like gone the old way, but we didn't. and you can see a different outcome. That's hard to measure, to your point. And to Rose's point, it's hard. You can't like put a number on that and say we're 18% better. I don't know how to do that, but I do know how to tell the stories.
Yeah,
And
it goes
all the
back to
stories-
your book. Yeah,
Go
it
ahead.
goes back to your book, Rosa, when you talked about we have to create that space for trust, right, and build those relationships. So, real nice connection with your book as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, trust is hard. Trust is hard, right? I mean, because so we say in the hop space all the time, at least let's build an environment where people can be a little more honest.
Yeah.
If I can tell you the truth without fear of retribution.
Yeah. One thing nice about complexity science, as we talk about it, is this whole idea of feedback and going viral. So if you build a small, condition of trust and people see it and they start talking to each other, somebody told somebody, then that trust actually exponentially grows on its own. So in some cases, it doesn't have to be top down. It can grow anywhere and just kind of spread.
Yep. Well, and that's the cool thing about all this is that this is not like the HOP initiative is not a top down initiative. We need people on board through the whole organization. There are lots of organizations where there's been like a safety guy that learned about it and brought it in and tried it out at his site and got his plant manager on board, and it sort of grew up and out from there. There are other sites where some corporate executive at some conference somewhere heard about it, and so it actually came to Ford Motor Company, United Auto Workers actually brought it in and then showed it, and then they, through their joint committee, Sean Coughlin and his team have worked with Ford leadership to bring it together. It's really cool how this is happening. There's not one way to do it. There's lots of ways to bring this forward.
Yeah. I think an important part of your book also is you do look at the downside, and you briefly talk about the few obstacles about operational learning. So I appreciate you humbly sharing some of the blunders and mistakes to avoid. What's on your list?
Well, so I mean, I think anybody in here that's done any of this can probably give even a bigger, better list than I would have. But there's lots of things that can get in our way. One of them is sort of this hindsight bias, where after something happens, we all sort of know what should have happened. So you hear somebody say they should have, they could have, why didn't they? Well, those are all hindsight bias counterfactuals. That's not what really happened. So fighting against hindsight bias is a tough one. Some of the old school leadership styles, right? I'm large and in charge, my way or the highway. Those sort of places can't really do this with a leader that wants to drop the hammer on somebody that messes up, right? So punishment gets in the way of operational learning, for sure. Groupthink, a whole bunch of us think a certain way, therefore it must be so. And Matt Torty's on here too. He knows this. As I was going, Matt, we like to hear from people that actually see things differently, right? I think human performance calls it the differing professional opinion. We value that at HOP. It's like, we need people that see things differently than me because they can help me with my own biases. So there's a lot of different biases we try to work our way through. Yeah, there's all those are things we can work through. I can tell you this, I've been doing this for almost 10 years. And my wife of 41 years has told me, she said, Bob, I see you seek to understand more than you used to. I mean, I have 2 engineering degrees, so clearly I think I know something, right? So I've always had an answer. And she said, you're getting better at actually listening. Now, Rosa, she hasn't said, I understand. She hasn't said, Bob, you understand me. So I don't understand her maybe yet, but I'm working on it, okay? But she did say that she sees improvements with how I even seek to understand with my kids. So I think this way of thinking starts to, well, Andy, my work partner, she has a vlog now, or a podcast, sorry. And she talks about sort of integrating this stuff into work, but also into everyday life. And if you haven't seen, so we give all of our training material away. We have a hophub.org is our website. And you can go there and you can find access to Todd Conklin's podcast. I do some video blogs. Andy is doing now these podcasts, but they're different than Todd's. Todd is so cool because Todd's very inspirational. He inspired me to do this operational learning stuff because he saw it and saw how it was needed. And he's inspired Andy to do a different sort of podcast where she's not doing a lot of interviewing. She's sharing some stuff and then sort of giving you some homework to think about, hey, how can you sort of try this out in your own place or in your own personal life? And so all that stuff is right there under resources on hophub.org. As well as a community. There's a community that Andy and Matt, who's now joined our team, put together. It's called hopcommunity.org, open space. Anybody can be a part of it. Some of you are a part of it. I'm not on it much because I'm not very good at social media stuff, but it's a place to share thoughts and ideas and questions. And then here's the cool thing is like, just look at with our book, Gary, we never advertised. We just said, let's just let people know it's available one time on LinkedIn. That was it. And we just said, let word of mouth carry it forward. And so that's what we've done. Yep. And so I appreciate this.
That picked up some good info from there. Yeah, picked up some good info from there, Bob. From that,
cool.
Just that social group, just sharing things with each other and asking questions.
And Matt, it keeps growing. Yeah, it's just growing, right? Go ahead, Matt. What are you gonna say?
Yeah, one key thing you said there too about going back to implementing this in your everyday life is your humble inquiry, being curious, not judgmental.
Yep, being teachable, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And so what's cool too about the community, Matt, is that there's only 2 rules. You can't sell stuff on it, and you have to be nice, right? So
yes,
because we don't want any of that drama and that trolling and all that garbage, right? We just want people that are in this space to join in and share thoughts and questions and comments. And so, yeah, I knew you were on it, and I don't even know how many people's on it now. It keeps growing.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of community want. Yeah, I mean, as it grows, and you know, again, it goes viral, and you know, we don't have to have this major initiative. We're going to do this. It just grows, and before know it, the paradigms have shifted, and we are accepting this as the new normal, and that's I think where we want to go on this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour. Has anybody got their hands up? Want to share something before I ask the big 3 takeaway question? Anybody? No? Okay, so let me do that. I know that what we've discovered over time after doing this, over 2 years now, tomorrow, and Rosa, what's emerged for us is that most of the folks that are on here are what we call chefs, not recipe followers. If you read Bob's book, this is a book for chefs. And I think, Bob, you already said here, we don't say do this to this, step by step by step. It's variable. And you'll find different companies will do different things here. So, Bob, what 3 takeaways would you like to leave our chefs?
Okay, so I can't help myself. Sorry, Gary. We got 2 minutes left. From our conversation today, anybody that's willing to share, what are 1 or 2 or maybe 3 takeaways that you have? Because I'm way more curious, did any of this help at all than I am about what I can tell you? Because I think you're smarter than me. So anybody that would be willing to share, what, if anything, did you take away from today that you're like, that might just help a little bit? Because I'll be able to use that as I move forward, as I do this training and coaching and sharing. So anybody want to share, either raise your hand and shout it out or put it in the chat. I opened up chat. I forgot about that. So
yeah, I'll go. I think the simplest one, the simplest one that you mentioned earlier about we just don't know how to predict everything. You know, it's something that we understand, but when you put it in that kind of succinct phrase, I mean, that's a mantra that should be the top of everyone's, you know, learning list. We don't know how to predict everything, and then how do you react from there? Fabulous takeaway.
Good. And I think Vanessa calls it a failure of imagination. Like we can't even imagine all the ways that things can go wrong, right? But you know what I find interesting too, Aaron, is the people that are closer to the work, they have they're better dialed in on it than I am. Yep. We got one here from Matt. Metrics without context are dangerous. Good. I love it. Yep. So there's a couple. Anybody else? We get one. Oh, Rosa's got one.
Yeah, I just like your presence, that you're very comfortable not having the answers. I think that it inspires a lot of trust and makes you more credible.
Thank you, Rosa. And I think we'll figure out more stuff if we don't think we already know, right?
Yeah.
Right. And Todd, so Todd and I were presenting somewhere one time, and Todd said, Bob's really good at operational learning because he doesn't seem to know very much. I'm like, wait a minute, right? And he was just messing with me because if you know Todd, he likes to pick. But yeah, I think you're right though. I think it helps to just say, you know what, I guess I probably don't know, but man, I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The big one for me is not having to sit there, let's identify the problem. I think that is, let's learn first.
Yeah.
The problem will probably emerge from the
Absolutely.
conversations we have about learning.
100% agree with you, Gary. As a matter of fact, you can even take the lean 7 steps to problem solving. The first one is define your problem. Just make it 8 steps. The first one is learn.
Yeah.
And in lean, we said go to the Gemba, but we weren't really good at like deep operational learning. I mean, maybe you were, I wasn't. But you can just take that 7 step, make it 8 steps. And the first one is sort of deep operational learning and then define the problem. Yeah, I think you're right, Gary. I think it makes it easier.
Yes.
Like, I don't think work is hard. It's there.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. There was 4, Gary. We got 4 out of that one.
Way to go. Awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I'm sure we could have gone on for a lot more time. And maybe Bob will bring you back, and maybe with Andy as well. And
Oh, you love her. Yeah, some of you know her. She's the best. She is the smarter.
Okay, so
younger,
that's when you
better
write your next book.
woman.
We'll bring Andy on.
What's that?
Oh, great. Okay, back to you, Tamara, to close things off.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Bob. This is an amazing conversation. Really has gotten a lot of us thinking. And I think there's a good podcast in there too, Bob. So I might connect with you because you've got me thinking. And for the members who joined us today, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, because without you, we wouldn't even be doing this.
Well,
So
Tamara,
thank you,
I'm
everybody.
honored. I'm honored that folks came on to talk about the book. Thank you for being curious about it. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you, Bob.
Pleasure's mine.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.